I'm Emily Lorenz. I am the beyond proud superintendent of Calallen ISD, relatively new, but I am so happy to welcome everybody here tonight. The group is a little bit smaller than it's going to be moving forward because we have sing-alongs in 4th grade, sing-alongs in 1st grade, basketball game. It's just a busy time of year. But for those of you that could join us tonight, I am beyond grateful for your time and attention. I'd like to introduce Kelsey Ramos. Kelsey Ramos is the assistant superintendent for Calallen for business and finance. So she's the money lady. So she tells me no a lot, and every once in a while she says yes. But we're gonna spend some time tonight really talking about background information, building that information up, talking about some demographic information about the district. Most of our time is gonna be spent in Finance 101. Unlike business finance, school finance is a very different beast. And so we want to lay the foundation today about how we get funded and the need for a school bond. So that's going to be a lot of our time today, because when people ask you questions, we want you to be informed. So that's where we're going to lay a lot of foundation today. Kelsey's going to talk about preliminary bond capacity. As we start moving forward into project decisions that we might want to move forward into a bond, how much money can we spend? You know, she likes to tell me no a lot. So she's going to tell you no a lot too during this process. So she's going to tell us kind of where we think we're going to fall. How much capacity do we have? So in our eyes, how much can we spend? So that when we start looking at projects at the next couple meetings and making decisions about whether or not to call for a bond, we'll know what we can do. So just to lay a little background information, what is the purpose of this committee? So right now, the first step is to really review and get grounded in the current district financial situation. Where are we? Where do we spend our money now? How much do we bring in? What status is the district in? We're going to review facility needs and recommendations over the next 3 meetings. We have walked every single campus. So we have walked every campus and every district facility. We also get complaint emails from directors and principals every week. So we have a pretty good grasp on what we need to do in terms of deferred maintenance. We have an idea of where we're going to have extensive growth. And then we just have some basic wants on top of needs, because we're here to provide the best possible education for the kiddos in Calallen. So what does that look like long term? You're going to be a part of deciding that future, okay? Then we'll determine the details of the next bond package. So today we're laying the groundwork. Next time we're going to be really talking about what are needs that we see as a district, what do you see as community members, and where do they mix, and where do we want to prioritize? And then finally, this committee makes the decision about whether or not to ask the board to call for a bond. The district can't just say, let's go, we want a bond, we're going to go out for a bond. Members of this committee will make a recommendation to the school board to determine whether or not we're going to move forward on requesting a bond package, okay? So that's why this is such an important committee, because you're deciding really what are the most important needs and wants we have, what's that future we want, and then also, are we going to go forward and put it out to our community for a vote? So that's the importance, and that's why we tried really hard to get people from across the district, across campuses, across activities. We have a very robust community, and so it's important that we're all represented in a way that gives a voice, okay? So who is Calallen? Few facts. We're up to 6 campuses now, because as you know, we closed McGee for a year to do repairs. It was an extensive repair. There was a half a mile of tunnels dug underneath McGee to get everything fixed, but it is open and it is beautiful and it is working. So that's exciting. We currently have an enrollment of 3,952 students, so right under the 4,000 mark. 54.7% of our students are eligible for free or reduced lunch. That's a big shift from Calallen of the past. So we currently have more than half of our students who live at or below the poverty line as a family. Our career and technology program, Larissa Duke does a lot of work on that one. We have 26 programs of study. So we have 26 different pathways to futures for our high school kiddos. We have 553 special education students. Those are all students who have special needs of one form or another that we have to serve. We have a student-teacher ratio of 13.6. We are very proud of that number. One of the best things to do for teachers is to give them less students so they can touch them more. We have a strong belief that the smaller we can keep our class sizes, the more impact we can make on the individual student having access to the teacher. We're very proud of that number. We started full-day pre-K for the first time this year. We have 120 full-time pre-K students. That is way more than what we've had in the past. We've had to add a teacher as the year has gone on, as more students enroll. This is a great thing for our district because the earlier we can get our hands on them, the more impact we can make. And finally, we have 65.5% of students are Hispanic. So that is a shift that we've seen over the last 10 years as well. We are a majority minority district, and it's a good thing. We also have 650 total employees. We're one of the biggest employers in the area. People don't always think about that. We also run the largest restaurant, believe it or not. Our cafeteria is an enterprise system, and it pays for itself. We serve more meals than any cafeteria or any restaurant in the area. We also have 299 of that 650 are teachers. We have 97 educational aides, so those are direct supports to teachers in the classroom. We have 136 auxiliary personnel and 84 administrative support. So that includes all the people who work in your offices, the librarians, all those staff are counted in that number. A little bond history. I'm going to shout out to Stephen Floyd. He probably doesn't like me recognizing, but he is, if you don't know, he is the numbers man. He is the district historian. So he always shares little facts with me. So he did some bond research because we were digging, but he's way faster. This district has held 17 bonds since 1940. That's how far back his history went. So I'm trusting you, Steve. 11 bonds have passed and 6 have failed. The total proposed bonds we have had in this district are 116, almost 117 million. 108 million have passed. The best passing percentage happened in 1954. 100% of voters voted for it. There were only 56 voters. They came out and they all said yes. They brought their friends and they came on a bus. Our most recent bond was in 2017. It passed at 58.17%. So not a huge margin, 58%. There were only a total of 820 voters that came out in 2017.
That was in May?
Uh-huh. The largest turnout was in 1968, and there was 1,486 votes cast. So think about that. As a bond committee, the numbers, the big voting numbers aren't out. Texas bond elections. So let's have another conversation about this committee. This past month, in November, Texans approved only 56% of bond proposals statewide. Athletic facilities improvements and athletic centers passed at a rate of 38%. Technology proposals at 76%, school buses 83%, and safety and security at 62%. So just a little statistics. Oh, my graphic's not showing up. I had another graphic that showed last May. It's actually happened since 2021. The state has been at about a 50% pass rate for school bonds. So that's kind of the world we're living in right now. A little bit about our demographic information in terms of what we're going to be needing and what we're seeing on the future. So in the summer of 2021, we started seeing an uptick and some variance also with our COVID. So we were seeing growth over the previous years, and then we dropped because of COVID, and then they started building houses over by East. That neighborhood was going up pretty fast. So we got a little concerned, and so we wanted to know, what is the future of Calallen? We were also looking at opening west and grade configurations. So we hired a company called PASA. They're a population and survey analyst group to conduct a demographic review. So lots of school districts that are looking for long-range planning for facilities, they hire companies like these, so we did. And what they do is they specialize in projecting future student enrollment by looking at new residential development, understanding land usage and undeveloped parcels, and relating findings to future student enrollment. So they came into the district, met with realtors, and went from site to site, talking to builders, and all people that are in that development business in the area. And they created a projection of what they think Calallen is going to look like. Go back one. So what they came to us with was these are the major subdivisions that builders said, these are what we're proposing. These are things that we foresee we're doing in the future. These are the number of homes that they projected from 21 to 25, 25 to 30, and then adding them together, the growth that we should expect over 10 years, 2021 to 2030. These numbers are pretty impressive. When you're looking at the RV resort is looking at adding 150 places alone. When you look at Calico Estates Unit 5, adding up to 126. Single families that they're looking at parcels of land that people have permits to develop, 264. And these numbers over here, I'm going to show you in a second, they divide up our district into quadrants, basically parcels, that look like this. So each of these are parcels. So they divided it up to see where exactly in the district we're going to have growth. All these new housing projections, these blue ones are the largest. That's where the most housing is projected to grow. Okay? So when we look at, oh, she's talking. I don't know what's going on. That's okay, Kelsey. So each of these show where the big parts are going to go. Because even though we know these houses are coming in, we need to know exactly where, especially for Wood River and East and West and McGee. Who's going to fill up when? So when you look at projected new housing occupancies, we have single-family housing, multifamily housing. Those are our two biggest numbers. So when we look at these in gray are the projections from 21 to 25, and in the white are 26 to 30. Those are pretty big numbers. As we're getting towards 2030, they're expecting a lot more rooftops. They're attributing a lot of that to the steel manufacturing plant in Sinton and expected growth out here off of Calico Road. So we're going to have more industry coming in, and then that Tesla wasn't even on the books when this happened. Our thought and their thought is that we're a great community. We have good schools. People are going to want to live here. So based on those, they gave us 3 scenarios of growth: low growth, high growth, and then projected. So to be conservative, low, high, they gave us a plot right through the middle by year spans. So they're projecting by 2030, our moderate growth enrollment should be at 5,031. What did we say our enrollment was right now? 3,952. That's a lot of little kiddos and big kiddos to put in seats if it comes to fruition. So we have a span of time that we're monitoring, but when we look at that, we have to plan long range. That's the task of this committee, is to be looking at where are we now, where we'll be in 5, where we'll be in 10, are we keeping up with the growth? Okay? So that's why it's really important that we're getting you to think that way. And so PASA was very important to us. So this is what the moderate growth enrollment scenario looked at by year. So 2021, 2022, we didn't hit those numbers because everybody took a hit with COVID. So a lot of kids unenrolled from school and haven't re-enrolled yet, or they enrolled in online systems. My projection is, and I could ask the principals, we'll be getting those kids back in over time. So we're not hitting quite yet what our projections are because of COVID, but we're making a comeback this year. Our principals are all nodding their heads. We're seeing enrollment even now. So we have kids coming in on a very regular basis this year. This is hard to read, but what this did is it broke down based on those parcels of land by each of the campuses, what is the projected growth through 2030. We wanted to know where are our pain points going to be, right? Where are we going to fill up first? What's our plan for adjusting to that growth based on where they think the parcels are going to go? This in yellow is East Elementary. When you looked at that parcel, a lot of those, 2 of the biggest blue boxes are over in the East zone, okay? The thing about East is that they're partnered with Wood River. Wood River is nowhere near capacity because a lot of the new houses aren't going in the Wood River zone. So we can help this capacity by redrawing lines, which nobody likes at all, I know. But we can save space at those 2 campuses over time if that's where the growth goes. The reality is that Calallen Middle School will be bumping over 90% capacity and at 96 by the end. So Calallen Middle School is actually our biggest projected pain point right now, okay? They also say that Calallen Middle School can hold 1,200 kids. It includes the old 6th grade wing. How many of y'all have been in there lately? How many love it? It has some issues. So that's one thing that we're going to be talking about throughout this, is that we don't even meet ADA compliance in that wing because you have to step up to go into classrooms. So it's an issue. So we want to make sure that we're looking at what's going to happen inside our schools and can we keep up. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey to talk about school finance. So most times when people say school finance, we all kind of grab a cookie. But she makes it so comprehensible and understandable that I think you're going to learn a lot. So thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. Like she said, we are not going to get into the weeds. We're going to stay at the 10,000 foot, and I hope to turn finance into plain English, because school finance is not English at all, the way it stands. So we're first going to talk about general operating, and towards the end of it, I think you'll realize why we're talking about general operating in a bond committee, because it's very important to school districts. It's how we fund our day-to-day operations. So where does that money come from? Where do we get our revenue in our general operating fund? We have federal sources. They're very small. We have state, which is called the Foundation School Program. We have local, which is primarily property taxes, but we get some Chapter 313 payments. We have athletic ticket revenue. We have donations, things like that. But the big 2 main sources are Foundation School funding and local property tax collections. And this graph right here is a statewide view of the makeup between state funding and local property taxes. And I think this is going to be eye-opening for some of y'all. It was for me when I looked at this statistic. In 21-22, local property taxes made up 62% of schools' revenue, and the state only kicked in 38%. Now keep in mind, every district is going to look very different. Some are solely funded by local property taxes, and some may only take in 15% of local property taxes. So this is just a statewide view, but property taxes make up the bulk of school funding. So how do we determine year after year how much funding we're going to get? It is very complicated, so I'm going to try to make it easy by using a funding cup. Think of a coffee mug. The bottom line is it is all based on student enrollment and student attendance and student demographics. Are they special education? Are they free and reduced lunch? Do we get some additional money for them because they need more resources to get their education than other students? But bottom line is the size of our cup is solely determined by students. So how do we fill up that funding cup here at Calallen? Are we 62% or are we less on local property taxes, and how does that work? So we have this big long calculation. You don't even want to see the spreadsheet. The tabs and the formulas go on and on and on. But it determines our entitlement. That is how much funding we're going to get. So you draw with a green marker there on your cup your entitlement line. Then you pour in our local property tax collections. And then the state comes in very last and says, what's that gap? And I'm going to fill it with state funding. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples, and it's a balancing act. The more property taxes we collect, the less state funding we get. It doesn't mean we get more because we collected more property tax. Again, it's only based on students. So we're going to go through a couple examples here that I think will help you realize how that all works. And these are real numbers that I worked with. They're roughly our numbers for this year. So if we had an ADA is average daily attendance, so it's basically taking your enrollment, by your attendance factor and coming up with ADA. That's how they fund us. It would be a lot easier if it was just enrollment, but unfortunately it's not.
To put it in an Emily term, it's butts and seats.
Yes.
They take how many possible days do we have? How many days was those kids' booties in that chair? And for the days that they miss, we don't get paid for them.
No.
Think of it that way. So it's how many days are they eligible for? How many days were they here? That's our multiplier.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because the electric bill isn't any different. The teacher's salary isn't any different because they didn't come to school those days. Our costs are still the same, but we're funded based on when they came to school. So 3,750 ADA, we collect 19 million in taxes. Our entitlement is 31.5. So going to this cup, but what if my taxes increase by 10%? I'm now collecting 21 million. If I have the same ADA, my entitlement line is no more. We got no more funding. Local property taxpayers just paid more of the school district's revenue that year than the state. But what if we grow? What if we have a big explosion in ADA? Our entitlement goes up at that point. We recalculate, we redraw that entitlement line at 34.3 million. We pour in our local property taxes, and then we pour in our state funding. So it's solely based on students. It's how you determine how much money we have in general operating. So with that being said, you can see how COVID impacted our revenue. If it's based on students, and we've had a decline in enrollment and a decline in attendance, then our revenue has also declined. We did have some hold harmless from the state that came in and made up for some of that. But as long as we continue to stay at a low growth like we've seen, these numbers stagger a lot, but the difference is really only about 150 kids from 2017, 18 to now, to 22, 23. So we've been fairly flat funded because we haven't seen a big explosion in growth yet. We know it's on the horizon, but it hasn't come yet. So we've been fairly flat on our funding. So a big portion of that is property taxes, and there is a lot that goes into that calculation as well. So I'm going to give you a very high level view. There's two tax rates that combine to be your Calallen ISD tax rate. And we're going to put our hat on and think about our personal finances here. So M&O is for maintenance and operations. That's to pay your cell phone bill, your grocery bill, your gas bill, your daycare bill, those types of things. Your daily maintenance and operations of the district are funded through M&O. That's the funding we just went through that goes into the general fund. There, it funds the day-to-day operations. It's the portion that 4 years ago, House Bill 3 at the legislative session changed, and it is subject to tax rate compression. So the more our values grow, the lower our M&O rate becomes. It's a sliding scale. Our INS tax rate is interest and sinking. That's your home mortgage. That is how school districts finance bonds and building new school buildings, remodels, anything that cannot be afforded out of the daily maintenance and operations you get a loan for, which is a school bond, and you fund that by your INS tax rate. You can only, as a school district, use that money for a purpose that the voters approved in all of those series of bonds. You by law cannot use that money on anything else. It is solely for bonds. And the state of Texas has a law that there is a maximum of 50 cents that you can charge to your INS tax rate. We're currently at 24.3 cents is our INS tax rate. So that all goes in to be the total tax rate that you as community members see on your tax bill. So here's just a quick history of the district property tax rates. This district held a TRE, a tax ratification election, many years ago, and was at the maximum of $1.17 on the M&O. So we got some state funding, additional state funding for that. However, you can see it slid all the way down to 94 cents and some change this year. Our INS tax rate was at 23.3 cents. When we had that first year of compression, we bumped it the 1 penny to what was approved by the voters during the 2018 or 2017 bond election. You'll see in some future slides why we did that, because we're able to pay off bonds faster with that additional penny, and it was part of the bond election. So overall in that year, though, your property taxes went down because your M&O rate decreased by much more than that penny. So currently we were a little over $1.40, or all the way down to about $1.18 now on our tax rate. So here's a history, the maroon of values and tax rates. So your maroon bars are your M&O value, and your gray bars are your INS value. And you can see how as these climbed, the tax rate dropped down. So this year, we had about a 9% property value growth, and we went down about 4 pennies, a little over 4.5 actually, on our M&O tax rate.
So, Kelsey, if I feel like my taxes went up significantly, is Calallen getting a lot more of that money?
No, your value went up.
Your value went up. Your taxes actually went
your school tax
your rate went down. So you might pay more, but it's because the value of your house went up, not because we decided to charge you more in taxes.
Right. So we as a school district only control our tax rate. We cannot control what the values are. That's a separate entity, the tax or the appraisal district that sets those values. So then we can only control what tax rate we set, or the board, what tax rate we set. So you're here and you're wondering, why is there 2 different values for our M&O and our INS? When you get your tax bill at home, you have 1 property value. You don't have 2 separate property values. So what's going on there? It's because of our Chapter 313 agreements. So the way Chapter 313 agreements work is they are property tax incentive programs made between the industry and the school district, and they have a tax value limitation on their M&O side. That's why you see our INS value is $2.9 billion, our M&O is $2.14 billion. And you're saying, hey, that's not fair. They're not paying their fair share of M&O taxes so we can run our school districts. They, in turn, pay us revenue protection and supplemental payments. But here's the really cool thing about them with the state funding formula. Those M&O, or those revenue protection and supplemental payments, go above that green line on our funding cup. They don't count as property taxes. So our state revenue is not reduced because they're giving us these revenue protection and they're gravy or icing on top of it. And we currently have 3 agreements. And at Monday night's board meeting, a 4th is set to come before the board for review and public comment and approval at that time. They're Equistar, Techstar, and Epic are the 3 entities that we currently have agreements with. So this is a cool number for Calallen ISD. Over the past 10 years, 2016-17 to 25-26, the 313 entities are set to contribute $23.6 million of icing to our cake. And it's also a very complicated finance formula. And in fact, they pay for a consultant for us to calculate all of this. The entities do. But it is, and this is very common, it is a roller coaster ride because it's based on value growth and our enrollment and all these other factors. So it's not a steady source of income, but that is a big number that they will contribute, and it does not affect our state funding. So how do we budget and spend our money here at Calallen ISD? Our budgeted revenue for this year is a little $41.5 million. We have 47% is that 47 or 50? 47. 47 is local property taxes, 43 is state revenue. And then we get some ancillary in other local funding and that federal funding. But 41.5 million, and that's been pretty steady Eddie the last 4 years. So then how do we spend our money? Our total expense budget is 47.5 million. So there's a $6 million difference there. Historically, we do not spend all of the expenses that we budget, and a good portion of that is to pay for the reopening McGee, as well as safety and security. 1.4 million of that is allocated to safety and security. But how do we spend it? 58% is spent directly on instruction for students. We jumped down 16% on instructional support. It's almost 75% of that pie is spent directly on the students of Calallen ISD. 3% on central administration, 21% on district operations, that's transportation, maintenance, utilities, property insurance, those kind of things. We have 1% on debt service, and then 1% on some other categories. So another way to look at it is, how do we spend $1? We're gonna peel off 80 cents of that for payroll, regardless of who it was for. Regardless if it's a classroom teacher, administration, or a bus driver, it's gonna come off the top. 80 cents of every dollar is spent directly on payroll. So then how do we spend the rest of that? This blue bar is operations, 7.25 cents. Those, I call our non-negotiables. We gotta turn the light bulbs on, we gotta have hot water, we gotta pay our property insurance. Those are our non-negotiables. So then we drop in the insurance and utilities next at 6.5 cents. The remaining is about 6 cents, and we spend 5.5 cents directly on instruction. So out of this is non-negotiable, this is discretionary, the bulk is spent on instruction. We spend less than a penny on administration and other. So a little history of our fund balance. So that is taking our revenue and our expenses and saying, what did we have surplus or deficit year over year? So you can see a history that we rolled 3 million, 4.6, another 3, 1.8, and almost $1 million this year. That up and down in some of those larger numbers directly correlate to those large Chapter 313 payments. So we are projected, our audit will also go on Monday night, projected a little over 24 million in fund balance. Like I said, we do not anticipate to spend this whole 6 million. We will spend a bulk of it though on safety and security and McGee repairs. But 18 million if we do spend the whole 16 million by the end of the school year. TEA says, Texas Education Agency, says the ideal fund balance is 3 months. For Calallen ISD, roughly $12 million, 11.75 million. So that 18 million would still be a very healthy fund balance. Not quite the surplus we've had in prior years, but still within the parameters.
And living by the coast, why is it so important to have a healthy fund balance?
So we would owe $4 million on a claim if we had a big name storm and needed to make a property insurance claim. So that is a big number.
So on top of the 3 months operating, it's safe for us to keep $4 million. If we did get hit, God forbid, by a huge hurricane like Harvey did, we would have to fork over $4 million to rebuild our facilities.
Yes. So how do we compare, right? It's great to talk about what we do with our money, but how do you compare it? Well, you, just like personal finances, you compare it to your friend, your neighbors, your parents. How are they spending? So we're gonna look at some of our neighboring school districts. These are our peer districts, similar size: GP, Alice, Toloso Midway, Flower Bluff, and Sinton ISD, all Region 2, all very similar in size and close in demographic makeup. So these facts and figures are all per student, because that equalizes the funding, because we all have different levels of funding. You know, not everyone's budget is 41.5 million, but if you do it per student, it then equalizes to be able to compare. So Calallen ISD is right behind Toloso Midway. It's really hard to see, but we're the middle of the pack in revenue per student. in the area. These are in arrears because of public data in the release of that. So these are based on 2021, but you can see, other than the one outlier of GP, which we all know, everyone's pacing about the same. So I don't anticipate that makeup to be very different when the new data gets released.
And that's Chapter 313 at work right there. That's how GP's numbers are so much higher. They have so much industry under a Chapter 313 agreement that their icing allows them to go well above their cup.
So how do we compare on expenses? We're leading the pack on expenses. Salaries. We have very competitive salaries. We will never be a GPISD, unfortunately, unless we get a lot of industry, but we're very proud of the salaries we do pay with the state funding we receive. Remember, that's 80 cents or 80% of our spending. So another way to look at expenses, this is a slide that
I love.
Emily is very, very proud of. Let's just look at direct instruction per student. We're still leading the pack.
So the majority of our money goes directly to instruction than any of our neighbors.
Yep.
We're very proud of that. The money goes, and the principals I think will tell you, I'll be like, how's that gonna impact kids?
Yeah.
What are you gonna do for kids? It's gotta be kid focused.
Yep. Well, and I have a budget request form that every department in the district uses, and you have to tie it to the kids. I don't care if you're transportation or maintenance or a principal, but you gotta tell me what you're going to do to impact the children with the money you're asking me for outside of the regular budget cycle. So I'm gonna jump in now. We've seen our finances. So if we have flat funding and not nearly enough, West Elementary cost us roughly $21 million to build. So on a $41.5 million budget, even with our healthy fund balance, we'd be saving for years and years and years to be able to do some capital projects out of maintenance and operations. That is very common. That's not unique to Calallen ISD. Everybody has to issue bonds to be able to do these capital projects. So I'm going to jump into talking about what can we afford? What is our bond capacity? All of this information was prepared and provided by Bach Financial Advisors. They've been the district's financial advisors for many, many, many years. So what is bond capacity? It's how much we can borrow, and it's the green right here. So you'll see the blue is our existing bonds and how much we pay. They stair step off because those are the years between bond issues. And you'll see we have quite a bit of capacity there in that green area. So like I was saying, when we raised the rate that 1 penny to match what was promised in the 2018 bond, it allowed us to do prepayments and refundings. Liken that to your mortgage payment is $2,000, but you pay $2,100 every year, or every month, so that you can pay it off a little quicker, save yourself some interest payments. That's what we've been doing. We have actively deployed various debt management practices with Bach to help lower our borrowing cost and increase our bond capacity. And in the last 10 years, we've saved almost $15 million in our bond program by doing that. So that's a big cost savings right there. So where do we stand region-wide? These next, there's going to be about 4 of these graphs, and they're all of the region with 1,500 students or more. So the bigger districts in our area. Where do we stack up on our bonds? So we are ranked 5th in outstanding bond principal. We have $66 million in outstanding bond principal. So let's look at it per student now. We drop all the way to 8th. So we don't have a lot of bond debt on our books per student compared to other area districts. What about our tax rate? How does that 24.3 cents stack up? We're right in the middle at 9th of our overall.
We're closer to the low end, Kelsey.
Yeah, we are. We're closer
end.
To the low end by 1.
It's not the middle.
But you can see all the districts: Orange Grove, GP, CCISD, West Oso, Alice, Sinton, Robstown, and Kingsville all have higher tax rates. Toloso Midway is just below us, right there. We're very, very close, and some rounding pennies out in the back. So what about our interest in sinking? What about the portion that pays our bond? We maintain that ninth at the 24.3. Those same players are right in front of us that were in the total tax rate there. So what about interest? It's the other factor that impacts bond capacity, but it's not a leading factor. And this is a history all the way back to 2000 when it was a high of 6.09%, all the way today at 3.65. Interest rates are going up, but remember, they were an all-time low. So when you look at 2018 is right in here when we sold our other bond versus current, we're not too bad. We're higher, but we're not 2, 3, 4% higher than 2018. Will it go up in the next months before a bond sale? More than likely, maybe, we don't know. But it's not in a bad spot right now at 3.65%. So the tax base of our INS, the taxable values, are the driving factor in bond capacity. So this is what we have added to our INS tax base year over year. 16, 17, 17, 18 were those very first Chapter 313s. Remember, they pay their full value to our INS program. They're only capped over there on M&O. So one of them has over a $400 million INS valuation, and they pay that whole bill to our bond program. We're seeing a spike right here again. That's that third Chapter 313. They just finished up and came online and paid their full taxes to us based on their full valuation. So what is our tax base in Cal Allen ISD? We didn't used to have a lot of industry. It was a lot of rooftops. We're slowly flipping that with these 313s coming online, but we're still almost 41% residential on our tax base and 52.5% commercial. And then there's a few other like vacant land and oil and gas, but it's very small here in the district. We're primarily just commercial and residential. Yes?
Do you know what like GP is? So we just have kind of general idea.
Oh,
I think they're at 80
Yeah.
of their tax base. Over 80% is now industry.
industry. Yes. Yeah.
That's what they were proposing on their bond that failed, was 80% would be paid for by industry.
By industry.
So probably pretty close.
So this is another way to look at that commercial portion of it. So the blue is our tax base, and the red is the Chapter 313 portion of our tax base. And you see how that has just exploded over the years, right? So a big bulk of that 52% commercial is our Chapter 313s, because we were a rooftop residential district before we got some of that industry. So what we all want to know, the $1 million question,
Millions.
What can we borrow? For no tax rate increase, they are estimating today, very preliminary, right? A lot of factors will flush out between here and May if this committee decides to call, but we can borrow $50.63 million without a tax rate increase. Bach has gone ahead and put what it would be for every penny after that, basically $4.28 million for every penny that the tax rate would be raised. That's also part of this bond committee's job. We are not going to make a decision tonight. That will be part of our future meetings, but deciding, do we go for a no tax rate increase, or do we try to raise a penny or 2 penny or any figure that the bond committee decides that they would like to put out there. Administration is working under the assumption that we're going to go after a no tax rate increase and working on that $50.63 million because it is the bond committee's decision. So we're going to take the conservative approach as we do these campus walks and as we start getting some preliminary pricing on projects. But the information is here that we could get $4.28 million for every penny that we raise after that. And it's not, you can go after 0.28 pennies, it's not set, the law's not set at an even round number. Yes, ma'am?
As y'all walk the campuses, who is it that determines the projects that are worth the bond money?
this committee?
So we're not going to give you a list that cuts off at the 50 million. We're not doing that. We've walked every campus with every administrator, the people who live there, and with every department. So Steve Campbell's here, he can attest. We walked every athletic facility known to man. We have a list that's well beyond that number. I'm not gonna lie to you. Needs and wants is what my dad used to always tell me. I'm gonna be honest, there's gonna be a lot of deferred maintenance on there. There's just some stuff that we're behind on maintenance, and then there's some beautiful projects we can add. We're at a place where we don't have to build a whole new school, which is a great thing, But you've been in our campuses. We refreshed this building with some paint, carpet, and it has made a world of difference because it looked like the hallway. So, there's little projects we can do, there's big projects we can do. We have gone out, and our concern was if we bring a dollar amount to you, you can't build everything overnight, right? And we're not the best at estimating. So we took the wants, the needs, the wishes. We're going to bring you more than you could ever get through, Angelica. But we have an estimator that we have brought in that's a specialist to estimate the cost with some additional time built in to make sure that we don't want to promise the world and then not be able to deliver it. So we're being conservative.
A little different. My question is, with regard to outside this committee, regular parent input. If we've seen an ongoing problem and we feel that it's worth being considered for a project, I'm asking how that information gets conveyed beyond administrators.
So we plan to be very transparent, and we're going to talk about at the end. We're going to open up a web page so that everybody in the community has the same access to information that you do. So it's being recorded tonight. We're going to have to do some editing to make me look good, but we are going to put it out on the website. This PowerPoint is going to be out on the website. We do not want to have a single community member be able to come back and say, I was unaware. So please know that it is our goal. And there's going to be a way to provide feedback on that page as well, because we're going to come to you first with a list of projects, and we're going to be estimating we might not have the dollars at the next meeting, but we will by the next. But it's going to be allow you the opportunity to prioritize, provide input, and you're a committee member, but you have friends in the community. We are trying to give you as much, we want to be very open with our information about what do we have, what can we get, what can we do. We want that. That is my commitment to this committee, and that you'll have the tools to share this with other people and gather that input, and we're going to have a feedback on that page as well. So we're not trying to by any means say, hey, just this committee, let's decide what we're going to do. I don't want you to think that, because that puts a lot of pressure on you as committee members too. Every bit of information you get will be available to the public, and we're going to talk about some of our communication plan as well at the end. But good question. But there will be an opportunity for everyone to see the proposed projects and to provide some input to the committee that we'll gather and bring back to you.
And bring your list as a committee member.
Yeah, you can.
That was I was
Yes.
gonna say.
No,
So
yes.
that'll be our next
Until
meeting.
This year, I had never walked into the dilapidated, mold-filled, disgusting locker room that the varsity boys play in.
Oh,
And so if my
we had that
question
conversation.
is- if my question is, how do I get a project put forward that gets these boys both a new weight room that they so much deserve as a project?
It's on the
and
list.
a
It's
on the
revenue?
list.
it's on the list.
That- I just want to make sure that.
No, when we
So then-
bring the list next time,
Do that stuff.
each and every one of you will be able to look at the list and say, did you think about?
Yes.
Yes.
Every single one of you will have that opportunity. We know. I have visited the field house several times.
Yes.
Trevor
We were
and I
there.
I spent a lot of time in Trevor's too, and I think Campbell can tell you that we are very much on board.
He's very nice in
Because-
his first year, so he may not be rude about it.
No, he was, okay. I want a little kudos, just a little kudos, because I think he can tell you when I went into the field house, we probably had bigger dreams than he thought that we would have for his field house. We know.
Yes.
We know. Our band is an amazing program. Our theater program is an amazing program. Our teachers at the elementaries, they kill it every day in the classroom. Our goal is for this committee to work through a list that touches every single campus and every single teacher and every single student. So that is the commitment that we hope you will jump on board with, to say, this is a bond for everyone. Okay? So yes, and you, next time, yes, you're gonna tear us up. We're gonna bring you the list, and you're gonna say, have you thought about? And then we'll be able to go back and add to it. That's why we have multiple meetings scheduled. And then we have people working on what is a realistic cost. Because when we get to the end, we are going to have to make the hard decisions about yes and no's,
And I would
needs and
assume
wants.
that the security and safety issue.
They're on there as well.
Project there for all the campuses.
It is. And let me, those of you that might not know, we're coming up with a information campaign on that too. The board, Jerry's here, so I'm going to praise him. They have already allocated $1.4 million this year to safety and security. So we are really moving towards to working to replace a lot of things. You're not seeing them as much yet. You will, just because there's a lead time right now. We've purchased things, we've done things, but when we replace doors, everybody else in the world is too. Right. But they have already allocated 1.4 million of our requests, and I will tell you, there are chunks in the bond as well that on our wish list. You would have to decide, but they are on our wish list.
It is on there. Yes.
So then, you said you had an estimator who kind of helps you with the cost of different projects and things of that nature. I mean, is there somebody, whenever you say, okay, we're going to put these safety and security concerns forward in this bond package, is there a consultant that says, hey, these are some things that I think would be great for safety and security? Who's coming up with these ideas? I get if you're walking the building, you say, hey, we need to replace this.
No, we did we had CCPD do an audit. We're hiring a safety and security administrator, who that's going to be their responsibility to oversee
As a full-time
position. Hopefully on Monday. We'll be taking it to the board. But we are committed to making sure that it remains a priority for us. Yes. Sorry.
Before
Yes.
we go past that slide,
Yes.
can you describe what it really means to a homeowner, what 1 cent means?
I'll go to the next slide for you.
Because a lot of people don't understand how the tax rate works. You're
Right,
right. It's
right.
$100 worth of value. How much of your do you
Yeah.
pay towards us based on $100 worth of value?
So the average home in Calallen ISD is $175,506. So that's how the tax code is written too. When you start putting things out on your tax notices, you use the average home value. So that's what our financial advisor has done. So it's 17.55 cents per year on that average home. So if your home's double that value, you would double that 17 cents. And that's per penny, right? So then it goes up from there. But our scenario 1 at the 50.63 is 0. The tax rate would not change.
Say that again, I'm blonde.
No problem. $175,000 home would, at a 1 penny increase, would pay $17.55 more.
And that
More,
jumps
okay.
up the bond, how many million per penny?
4.28 million.
Now, the thing that people get confused with is in Calallen, I'm sure you all saw it on your taxes this year, the values of your houses went up. And so you're paying more to us, don't get me wrong, but we're not adding, we didn't add any pennies. In fact, we went down. But since it's based off the value of your home, when your value of your home goes up, you're going to pay more taxes.
And that's
So
just average.
they see a bigger number on their tax bill going to Calallen ISD, but we didn't raise our tax rate. The value of your home went up. And so that's where some people in the community get confused. Like, I'm already paying more this year to Calallen. Well, it's because your value went up, not because as voters the board agreed to up your tax rate.
We're all protesting this year.
Yes, you are. Kristen?
The bond would be separate because you said that what we pay property taxes, the state then fills.
Right.
Right.
So
The bond is
separate. So
outside.
If we raise a penny, then that goes
We keep
to,
it.
We keep it.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
your mortgage. The cup is your maintenance and operation. That's your regular old bills, right? Outside the cup is your interest and sinking. That's your mortgage.
Your
So
voter
that
approved.
you determine, the community determines how much we get.
And when you call a bond, you have to determine what you are calling, what dollar amount and what impact to the tax rate. So that is a decision, like we said, that this committee will be working on, because to be able to call a bond, you have to have those specifics already worked out.
In terms of what are we asking the money for?
Yep.
What are we going to do with it? We have to be able to tell the community, you're going to give us this money and this is what we commit to doing. That's why we're being very particular, because we have passed some bonds historically where we didn't finish out all the projects. We want to finish out the projects this time. So that's why we're being very conservative with an estimator, saying, yeah, it might cost this much right now, but we're projecting that it's going to cost you an additional 5% over the next 3 years it's going to take to build.
Yeah.
So we're being very conservative on that end.
He's
as
working
well.
construction timelines as well as estimates kind of at the same time, because on day one, you can't start every project, right? And so how do you scale those out, and how do they impact the cost of those projects?
Well,
Yes, sir.
That's really the other thing I've been thinking of is we need to not only prioritize what goes on the list, but prioritize to the community exactly the order in which they're going to be done.
Yes, and this
So
committee
that way
can do
you don't
that.
see, oh, well, this is on the list and I really want this, and then it never came to fruition because we ran out of money. Well, it was number 11 on the list, and if we have enough money, then that'll be completed.
Right.
And that's the way,
We
that way
prioritize.
everyone knows
Absolutely.
Exactly what to expect over time.
Because
Yes.
some of us that were here the last one election, I remember the swimming pool issue. It's like, oh, the football got there.
I don't want to talk about the pool.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And so we
don't
are
wanna be
trying,
that committee.
so the numbers we're going to bring you are estimated out with a percentage of what they believe it's going to cost to really, really finish the project. So we really felt that was an important part of this bond, because we want to make sure that if that's what we're promising you, we want to do everything we can to get it done.
And just one more thing for clarity.
Yeah.
The 50 million that we can raise without raising a penny tax. That's just we have in surplus from our earnings or our, can you explain that again? But basically,
So
we
it's,
go out there
yeah.
without raising anything and do 50 million right now.
Right. So it is the amount of payment we can make on principal and interest with
Our current.
the
Maintaining.
current, yes, with
the
maintaining
current.
the tax rate, right? So they look at what our value is times our INS tax rate using a collection history, right? We don't collect, there's people out there that don't pay their taxes and go into collections. So it's usually 98% for this district. So they use that and they say, okay, every year you can afford to make a $6 million INS payment. So how much money can you borrow? And we have to we're still paying on old bonds. That was the blue portion of that graph that was kind of stepping down. So we have to be able to afford our old bonds plus our new bonds.
Is that the difference in like TM, they had the $98 million bond? They just didn't have bonds that they're still paying on?
They were
Yeah,
going to ask for more pennies.
Yeah, they may have done more pennies. I don't know without looking at it, but they do have a more robust tax base than we do. They have a lot more industry. And this 50.6 million, the interest rate that Bach is assuming is 4.5%. He feels that is conservative, right? So as we work through this process, I will be in constant contact with him to update this slide for us, right? So every meeting will start with what's our new Bach estimate of bond capacity, because as we get closer, he can tighten down some of those projections.
So then, presuming, let's say the bond passes and we say, this is item 1 through 10, we think these are all things that the community wants. What safeguards are there once that bond passes and we have a list of 1 through 10, if, to prevent, 4 from a year later getting moved up to being number 1, how does the community know this is the list, this is staying in? Is it something that they could just have a school board meeting and say, hey, we're moving number 10 to number 1 now? What kind of makes sure
So
that stays?
when we go out for the bond, if we don't do what we say we're going to do, we're in trouble, number one. But we're going to talk later about how propositions work. It's not all one big pot. The state has rules where we have to break out athletics separate from regular facilities. And if we decide to build, let's say, a standalone performing arts center instead of remodeling what we have, that's a third proposition. So in all likelihood for us, it's going to be at minimum 2 propositions. There's going to be a Prop A that is all of our regular facilities, and then anything that touches an athletic facility is going to be on Prop B. So they're actually going to be voting separately, and they can pass separately, they can fail separately.
But it would, if this committee prioritizes a list, it would take, because this is what we are taking forward to the voters. And remember, we can't do anything with that money that the voters said no. So for example, on our last bond, when we had to make the hard decision to postpone some projects to build West, it took board action. Yes.
It was always explained to me that this is the list of bond the community approved, but the board has the final say. So it doesn't really, you can approve all this, and if you got a board on there that says we want to build this,
They can
build
do that,
and
yes.
Ignore everything else.
It's not politically really great,
This is my
but
bond issue
yeah.
committee to be part of, and there's been a lot of things that everybody wants, and we promote it, and it never gets done.
yeah.
So, it's a board decision.
And you hit hiccups. Like when we looked at West was proposed for, what was the original amount proposed for West?
I think it was 17 million.
That
Or
number can't-
12?
just to give you
I think it was 12.
12.
record box. I'm the guy who's often got all the arrows coming at me. When this is the problem, I'm just gonna say this very clearly, I'm a very straight shooter. When you sit down and we do an estimate on a project, that one came in at around 15 million. By the time we come up with a budget, now this is the way the world truly works. By the time you sit down with a budget, and then 6 months later, we decide, let's go have an election. And then 6 months later, we sell the bonds, and then we get an architect involved who sits and draws this out for 3 to 4 months, conduct multiple interviews. 17, 18 months has gone by. So that's why it's ever critical that when you set and design a budget, now you've got to have a crystal ball. What is inflation going to do to the price of construction?
And
18
and
And
the
that's-
17, that's what we got caught with West, was we got hit with COVID and
Harvey.
supply chain
And Harvey.
because of Harvey as well.
And I will say, if we'd had Blair on those first two bond issues I've been involved with, we wouldn't have had a lot of problems we have. He's done a wonderful job. and he's
Yes.
tested.
Yep.
And
But-
and he's thank you, Blair. And he's on board with us estimating them so that we're very clear on
Yeah.
what do we think we can legitimately
The
accomplish.
construction world has changed.
We'd rather have money left over
Yeah.
Yep.
to do extra projects.
And the construction world has changed because of the pandemic, right? And so we needed that outside expertise to help us with those inflation, right? We can call anyone and get a quote today, but timelines, right? So if it passes in May, we won't even legally sell our bonds and have that money until November at the earliest. So there's a lot of legal hoops, right? So it's not the price today, it's the price, down the road.
Yvonne?
Just for clarification, let's say we have 15 million, you said there's two propositions, right, athletics and that. You're gonna have to put money, like, let's say out of the 15 million, let's say 10 million will go to athletics.
Yeah.
If that proposition passes.
We don't
you
get that
can't move
money.
that money back,
No,
correct?
ma'am. We would have to have another election
Right,
to do
okay,
it.
I just wanna make for
Yeah,
clarification. on
yeah,
that.
and I'm gonna,
That's what I was gonna
Yeah.
just say. The bonds have changed and the history of it in the way
Yep.
that they're, in the way that you can break them out. It used to be, it was just one big lump
Yeah.
sum and then whatever the board decided.
Not anymore.
Now it's. they're
Propositions.
Into their propositions. And
Yep.
if the proposition fails, you can't take this other monies and say, oh, but we really wanted this from this one over here. So let's take those monies and go do that. We can no longer do that.
yeah.
So it used to be one big umbrella.
Not anymore.
And it's no
That
longer
keeps
that
people
way.
from passing academics and let's go put it on the football field.
Yep.
Let's pass it on the football field and go give it to the school.
That's right.
So I'm going to talk about those bond election changes. I don't have a crystal ball, and none of the lawyers will tell me the true answer, but I have a gut feeling when you look at the passage rates of school district bonds in Texas, they have tanked in the last 4 years. 4 years ago, we had election law changes. There are two really odd things that happened. One, if this committee decides to go after the no tax rate increase at the 50.6 million, as a voter, when you walk up to that machine to vote, in bold on that proposition will say, this is a property tax increase. That is a law. We can't get around it. We might be able to get it changed, hopefully in this next session, but we're stuck with it.
So because they're saying it could potentially go down if you don't pass it. So everything is considered a tax rate increase.
Yes. And so
So that's
as a
it's
committee and as a
education,
district, yeah,
education.
we'll have to be
education.
very committed if we do the 50.6 million on putting education out there regarding why you see that on your ballot and how it's not the case, right? So that, I think that has directly impacted
100%.
those passing percentages, because if you're, as a district, not reaching people and educating them during the bond election process, and they walk up and they say, oh no, I don't want a property tax rate increase. So it's an unfortunate law, but we're stuck with it. The other one is the one they were talking about separate propositions. So these are the items that would have to be on a separate proposition. Stadium with seating capacity for more than 1,000 spectators, a natatorium, any other recreational facility that is not a gymnasium or a playground, a performing arts facility, teacher housing, And anything related to technology, unless it's inside of like a new build, right? So if it's part of a new school you're building, it could be part of that Prop A. But if you have a school and it needs new technology in there, like something you need to add capacity or you need to replace old equipment, it goes on its own proposition. There is a lot of gray area in this. So once this committee has whittled down a list, we will have to send it to our bond counsel, and there's a likelihood they'll have to get an attorney general opinion because we don't want to get caught on the other side of it. We'd rather ask the attorney general for his opinion ahead of time on how he's interpreting our list. I don't think we're going to put anything on there so complicated that it requires attorney general, but we will have to get our bond counsel involved during that to then come back and tell us, here's your propositions and here's what goes where. I think we had a question in the back.
Improvements to existing facilities have to be separate?
Yes.
So if you're looking at it, it looks like it's new, but I guess in addition to
Yes.
improvements.
Yeah.
If you touch it.
Yeah.
If you touch it,
And
it's on.
separate issues like that make it easier for those to fail.
That's the problem.
And that's the other thing, right?
You
So
can blame
you're.
it on Katie and Alan and all the
Yes,
$80 million
you can.
houses they built.
That's why it was a 38% pass rate in
Yeah.
November. And
That's
and I'll
where
be
the bill
honest,
came from.
November elections, you know, you can go back and forth, but sometimes November elections bring out more people who aren't as educated about the school bond.
Yeah.
May, it's not as, you know, those that care about school, we hope will show up and vote. I mean, I'll be honest.
So that's bond capacity and just some of the laws and where we're at. Like I said, it's very preliminary. Those estimates could change tomorrow, but before every committee meeting, I will work with Buck, and that can be our opening slide, right? Like, let's look at where our bond capacity is currently, how it's changed.
So kind of looking ahead, we have our next bond committee on January 10th, so put it in your calendars. January 25th is the 3rd. I'm going to be honest, we have reserved this room for January 31st. Worst case scenario, if we haven't got that list right where we want it to be, I'm going to ask you to come back for another day. But we're hoping that through the next 2 meetings, we can really focus on that work. On February the 13th, we have a board meeting. If this committee decides to ask the board to call for an election, that would be the meeting where a contingency from this group would go and make a presentation to the board and ask them to call for the bonds. February 28th, if we make a call for the election, we want to really be out there in the community. So we're going to be doing town hall meetings. We've already have them scheduled for the 28th of February, March 23rd, and April 18th. And then we have another communication plan, which we'll talk about as we go forward. But if we feel we need more, we're going to do more. We want to be out in the community and be a voice. So this is the preliminary bond election timeline that comes to us. So basically, prior to February 17th, you have to make the call. Like, that's the deadline. So that's why we're asking for a committee to decide prior to the 13th, which is our board meeting. And then between April 6th and 26th, we have to publish the notice of election. Prior to the 17th, we post the notice of election. April 24th through May 2nd would be early voting. May 6th would be the bond election. May 9th through 17th would be the board meeting to canvass the election. In that window, our May meeting. June 8th through 16th, you have the 30-day contest period. So if anyone has an issue with how the election went, they can contest. And then in July or thereafter is when we can actually start moving out to try to sell our bonds. So that's the timeline for how we're working. This is our goal sheet. We were waiting for this meeting so that we could have information to really post and start flashing out there. Kelsey and I have been working on a communication plan. We'll be posting up the website soon. We're going to give you the link. It's going to be the banner on the Calallen webpage. We are planning flyers, mailouts to go out to our community because a lot of people don't always get on social media. We'll have a social media presence. We're going to do our meetings. And then we're also creating fact sheets. So once we have all of our projects, we will have fact sheets for the proposition that will be posted, that will be out, and that you can easily share with people to get the information out if you decide to call for a bond. So we have a whole communication plan getting ready to roll out. It's just going to be the work we do and if you decide to call for the bonds.
And are we also going to have to create a PAC to raise money to do the advertising?
The PAC would be separate from the school district. Right. So if a group of these committee members wanted to form a PAC, You could to purchase additional materials. As a school district, all of our employees, which is a big chunk of our voters, right? We cannot use district funds, district emails to promote a bond. All we can ask you to do is vote. That's it. So I can't tell you vote for. So the only information and the only thing we can do is share facts as a district.
Yard signs and things like that have to come from.
I have a request for all the information.
We
new
can
information.
do
So we'll share that with you.
yard signs, facility signs, mailers, but they have to be factual.
only.
Facts only. Which there's some very good, examples out there of things districts did that are factual and considered factual. Again, our bond council will be very involved in that process. In fact, I talked to
approve
them ahead of this
everything.
meeting on give me the do's and don'ts, right? I don't want to break any laws right from the beginning. And so anything, in fact, before we post this presentation online, it'll go to him to make sure that, everything's good. We'll post it online. Everyone can see it. So, but
And
yes,
so
we have
we're-
to state the facts.
So we already have in our plans that if we call for a bond, we have dates where we'll be on every campus sharing the facts with every staff member, but also what they can and cannot do. Because we don't want to make a mistake that would preclude us from being successful.
And we'll bring some examples to this committee probably at our last meeting. There are some crazy statements that you would not think are selling a bond that the Attorney General has said we're selling a bond and we're not factual. So it's actually very tight on what we can put in our communication as a school district. It's basically, here's the information on the propositions and here's your dates you can vote, and that's where we end at the information that we can put out there.
So we can't market it. That's
Anyone
where
in
we
the-
rely
yeah.
on like a pact if they choose to create one. We cannot create one.
And that's why, like, when we designed the bond logo, it's, there's no fancy slogan or because we can't have any of that information. And so you see school districts just saying bond and the year, because that's really all we can put out there in kind of a slogan and a campaign. We had lots of cute ideas and they
said no.
They did not
They
make
didn't
it.
like them. Not at all. So, thank you for attending. I put this in my message to you, when I invited people, is that it does take a lot of hard work, and I appreciate you being here. And we need input from the robust community, all of the community, to make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of all of our kids. So we really, truly appreciate your time today and don't forget to come to the next two.
Yes. And next time we will bring to you the list.
The preliminary list.
The preliminary list from everything we heard on our campus and department tours, and that'll be our time to hear from y'all. What else should be added? Is there something that we shouldn't get an estimate on? What are you hearing from your friends in the community as needs? Like, we're gonna create some group work sessions where y'all can share your group tables, and then we can come together as a bigger group and share what the common themes were, right? And then the third meeting is where our estimator will have all those, they call it a shopping list. They're gonna give y'all a shopping list. And so it'll say exactly what the project is and what the estimated cost is so that y'all can prioritize from there.
Can we get the list like in an email before we come to the meeting, just have time to digest some of the things?
As soon as we have it, we will share it. We have been out a lot on campuses and in every department meeting with our leads to try to, and now we're looking at it and saying, what can we take care in maintenance out of our regular operating budget? What doesn't need to be a bond item? So spending a little bit of time with our staff, making sure that we're making a list that's reasonable.
Well, I mean, and just listening, to what's going on in the district and where we really sit, I would think, already I'm thinking about the next bond. The next bond is really build a middle school, probably.
Or we might have some ideas.
We have some ideas. The old 6th grade wing. What can we do with that space? Because it is a big chunk of land. It's not ADA compliant. It's older. It doesn't fit safety and security for modern standards, right? It's your old outdoor corridor type building. So we are having the estimator, who is also an architect, work through some ideas to
add capacity.
If something like Angelica brings up the field house and the weight room, if there was a new field house that was built and there was no weight room contained within it, is that an athletic purpose is that
Athletic.
Athletic.
automatic?
Weight rooms are considered athletics.
I'm saying if there was no weight room,
Oh.
if it's separate and apart, it means the structure that's being built.
If
It's all athletic.
If it's locker rooms, training, that all falls under the definition. Non-classroom instructional space.
Yeah. But, and this may have been confusing from the way I worded it, not every athletic idea has to go on a single proposition, right?
Right. It's
so all athletics as one is rounded up and becomes proposition B. So, you know, if y'all say do a scoreboard, do the field house, like we're not
Do a
going to
tennis
have
court.
prop B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It's athletics as a whole get rounded together onto one proposition.
Yes.
So with these estimates, are there gonna be any documentation, the risk analysis around the estimate? Is that gonna be provided with the list as well?
I can
Probably we can ask him for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can ask.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd like to see like what we're looking
And we can ask them to actually come speak to the group too about how they calculated that estimate and provide that information to us. Yes.
Just to pitch in real quick, most of the estimates he's coming up with, the particular gentleman that's working with us on the project is doing this exact same thing in 3 different districts. He's already pricing their projects at the similar dollar per square foot. They're a similar footprint, same size district. So he's getting some real world numbers.
But yes, we will
The trick to
absolutely.
This is the crystal ball. Try to imagine right now if I ask you a question, how much would your food bill, electric bill, gas bill be 18 months from now?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, we're putting a pretty big markup on a lot of these items because I, as a new superintendent who would love to keep her job, I would like to fulfill the list and be able to say, hey, we have a little bit left over.
What do you
I
do
mean,
with
that would be,
If we overestimated, what do you do with that?
Board.
the board,
We go back to the board.
the board makes the determination at
But
that point.
everything has to be completed.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the extra.
Completed and paid
And then
for.
it can be
and then-
reallocated.
Yeah. And that
You
would
have
be,
to do the bond list first. If you run short, the board prioritizes. But if you have money left over, then they can allocate those funds to another project.
and it has to be, like, we can't say move it to M&O or,
No.
you know, pay salaries, right? Like, it has to be within
A
the
capital
legal of,
project.
like, a capital project and,
Don't sell a bond. You don't have to sell all the time.
Yes, you don't have to.
You don't have to sell them at the front end. You sell them as you go and as you need them.
But I would probably spend the money, Kristen. Yes.
I would too.
yeah. And I mean, the other thing, you know, which I don't think the board would take this possibility, but they can choose to pay down prior debt with any savings. You know, it's part of a legal, you know, it's allowable. So those are the things they can do is name another capital project or pay down existing debt within the INS fund.
So we've given you a lot of information today. Yes, a lot of information. Digest it. It's going to be available. You have a copy, but we will be putting a copy. We will email everybody in the group. If you signed on the bottom today, just make sure I have an email address so that I can add you to the share list. And we will share once the web page is up so you'll know exactly where to go.